Welcome back to the Foundry by Forge College. If you're rolling right in from our last lesson on automation for deployments inside the Applied Solidity development track, huge congratulations, you've got your deployment pipelines completely automated, which is honestly a massive milestone. But now we're staring down a brand new challenge. Who actually gets to pull the levers on those deployed contracts? In this explainer, we're stepping right into the architect's shoes. We're going to build a rock-solid, completely maintainable blueprint for access control. It's all about figuring out exactly where to put your security checkpoints so your protocols stay absolutely bulletproof. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's take a look at the architect's blueprint. We'll be starting off with the factory gate mental model before figuring out where exactly to place our security gates using some real-world token minting and protocol configuration scenarios. Then, we'll wrap the whole thing up with a simple 5-step decision workflow and a really handy strategy matrix.
So part 1, the factory gate mental model. This is all about viewing your smart contract like a physical factory.
Think about it. When you're designing a smart contract, you're basically designing a bustling industrial factory. You've got raw materials coming in, you've got high-voltage machinery buzzing away. You wouldn't just, leave the front doors wide open and let anyone wander off the street to play with the industrial stamping press, right? No way! That would be an absolute disaster. Well, in our smart contract factory, our code's access checks are those physical security gates. The factory entrance, that maps perfectly to your public entry points, the outermost functions of your contract. Then you have the workbench thresholds. Those are your internal helpers, the functions safely doing all the heavy lifting behind the scenes. And what about those specialized tool cabinets? Those are your role modifiers. They act like highly specialized locks, making sure only a worker with the exact right key can pull out a potentially dangerous tool.
Now, the real deciding factor for where we actually place our heaviest security gates comes down to one core concept: blast radius. It's exactly what it sounds like. We're asking, what is the potential extent of the damage or the financial impact on the protocol and its users if an action goes completely wrong, or if an attacker exploits a vulnerability? Look at it this way. If a worker drops a wrench in the break room, the blast radius is tiny. Who cares, right? But if someone accidentally hits the self-destruct button on the main factory floor, while the blast radius is massive, it's game over. So the larger the radius, the heavier and more deliberate your security gate needs to be. It's that simple.
Moving on to part 2, placing your security gates. Let's analyze a couple of scenarios, starting with minting and configuration.
So with our factory floor all drawn out, we've got to start weighing the pros, the cons, the gas costs, and the audit surfaces of where we put these gates. And remember, every single gate you add literally costs your users gas. So here's our first big architectural dilemma. When a user wants to mint a brand new token, where exactly should our code verify their credentials? Do we check their ID right at the front door, or do we wait until they're standing right in front of the workbench?
Well, we essentially have two main options here. Option 1 is using a public modifier. Think of this as your massive bouncer at the front door. It gives you super fast entry point authorization, entirely stopping unauthorized callers from burning any gas beyond that initial, very first check. But the trade-off is that if you have really complex rules, like say dynamic per account limits, you might actually end up duplicating those internal checks somewhere else in the code. Then there's option 2, an internal helper. This is putting the check right at the workbench. It perfectly centralizes reusable business logic, which is fantastic for keeping your code nice and clean, but it does come with a slightly higher gas cost, and it makes your overall authorization policy just a little harder to spot at a glance. So what's the recommended approach? Actually, it's a hybrid. You want to use a lightweight role modifier right at the public entry point to quickly verify who they are, and then call into your modular internal helpers to enforce specific invariants, like checking supply caps to verify what they're doing. Best of both worlds.
Let's pivot to our second scenario. How do we secure protocol configuration? Picture writing a function that sets critical fees or completely changes core protocol parameters. Going back to our factory metaphor, this is no longer just someone operating the stamping press. This is someone trying to override the entire factory's fire suppression system. The blast radius here is exceptionally high.
When we analyze the trade-offs for configuration, option 1 is using a direct modifier, something simple like an only owner tag. Now sure, it's straightforward and it gives you really low latency execution, but it concentrates a massive, catastrophic blast radius risk right into a single point of failure. If that one owner's private key gets compromised, the whole factory burns down. No way around it. Option 2 is utilizing a time lock or a governance address. This approach actually moves the whole deliberation process off-chain. It requires multiple parties or specific time delays, all while keeping the actual on-chain checks really minimal. Yes, it creates a much more complex execution flow, but honestly, for high blast radius protocol configurations, a time lock is absolutely your best bet. It gives your community the time they need to review the change while leaving the contract's internal checks super minimal, yet highly explicit for auditors.
All right, part 3, the decision workflow. Let's look at a concrete 5-step checklist for all of this.
So, how do we make these architectural choices consistently without just guessing? Whether you're deep into our advanced developer tracks or you're just exploring what Forge College has to offer, you probably know we love a good, repeatable process. Here is our foolproof 5-step checklist. Step 1. Classify the sensitivity and the blast radius. Ask yourself, is this a global parameter change or just a local state update? Step 2. Determine your need for context validation. Do we need dynamic rules, like checking if a user is on a specific whitelist? Step 3. Choose your enforcement locality. Are we using a public entry point for simple auth, an internal helper for reusable logic, or maybe a time lock for governance? Step 4 is applying least privilege, which we are going to break down in just a second. And finally, Step 5, review your gas and audit implications. Always ask yourself, am I hurting composability here? Because remember, composability is just a fancy technical term for how easily your smart contract can seamlessly snap together with other protocols, kind of like Lego bricks. If your security gates are way too convoluted, absolutely no one is going to be able to integrate with your factory.
I really want to zoom in on step 4 for a second, applying least privilege. In smart contract development, this is completely non-negotiable. You have got to give each role the absolute narrowest capability set possible. We want highly granular roles. A worker should have a specific minter role or a specific pauser role. You need to avoid single, all-powerful master keys like the plague. Look, handing out specific, narrow keys instead of one giant skeleton key is exactly what saves our factory from total ruin if just one single worker's credentials happen to get compromised. And honestly, as a professional courtesy to anyone auditing your code, please always document your role holders, your rotation strategies, and your revocation procedures directly in your specs.
Finally, part 4, wrapping up access strategies. Let's put this all into a blueprint matrix. To perfectly synthesize everything we've been talking about, we can build a definitive gate location matrix. It's essentially a cheat sheet. For global upgrades, your gate location is a governance address or a time lock, simply because of that massive blast radius. For minting, it's a public modifier combined with internal checks that perfectly balances clear authorization with complex supply rules. For per-user operations, like transferring assets, you're looking at entry point checks with internal validation to prevent misuse early on. And for an emergency pause, you definitely want a public modifier pointing to a designated pauser. Why? Because when the factory is actively on fire, you need incredibly fast execution with clear authority. You do not have time for a 3-day governance vote. Keep this matrix handy. It is literally your ultimate cheat sheet for balancing ironclad contract security with long-term maintainability.
So, I'll leave you with this final, kind of provocative thought. Are you ready to actually build the ownable pattern? Because you now have the architectural blueprint and the mental models required to make truly maintainable, highly secure design decisions for literally any protocol you work on. In our next lesson, we are going to roll up our sleeves and apply these exact principles to implement the ownable pattern in real working Solidity code. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Be sure to check out forge.college to master more Web3 development topics, explore all our other resources, and as always, keep building securely. I will see you on the factory floor.